Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Mike McKinsey, and he was a guest, I think it was a year ago, but he's revealed more about his story that he didn't feel comfortable revealing before. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so just share what you like, start where you like, and we'll get into it.
Sounds good. So thanks for having me back, Peggy. I appreciate it. I should probably say, since you mentioned that I was here a year before and I wasn't comfortable telling it, I should probably tell why before I get into
Yeah.
the story. The NDE that I had was just so amazing. I spent 12 days in the hospital. I came home, and of course, some of my friends came over, and they'd sit down on the couch, and I would tell them, "I've got to tell you what this amazing thing happened to me." And so I go through the whole NDE. They're holding my hand. These are 45, 50-year-old men crying with me. It was so emotional. And then I got to the second part, the part that I wasn't comfortable talking about. And their expressions went from, "Oh my gosh, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard," to, "Dude, you're crazy." It was
Mhm.
just so weird. Uh, and so after about five or six times telling that story to my friends, I kind of heard Jesus saying, "You don't have to tell this part yet." And I was like, I mean, I felt almost relieved because I thought, yeah, because I'm losing credibility here. Nobody's going to believe me. They're going to think I had brain damage during this whole episode, and they're just, they're going to think I'm nuts.
I
And so,
know. It's like, do I tell what, something happened to you? Do I tell what people believe or I tell the truth?
yeah,
Because people often won't believe the truth.
yeah, exactly. And it was just so bizarre. So I go on, I've told the story, like you said, I was with you for a year ago, a little over a year ago, I think. And I try to read all the comments. And I try to respond. I'm not really good at that, but I try to respond. And I kept reading this one comment over and over that said, "Your NDE wasn't real. It just happened because you had a hallucination because you had a high fever." I had a fever over 104. And yeah, you can have a hallucination. But then the second part, I didn't have a fever, much of a fever. I had 100, I think it was 100.5 when the second part happened. And I thought, well, it's just not true. And I have all these answers.
Right.
And
And
I
I don't
honestly,
think hallucinations make so much sense. It has the clarity and the wisdom that NDEs have.
yeah, I didn't either. I mean, hallucination, I touch the hand of Jesus and he transports me somewhere. I just don't, and it was just such a physical thing. But I thought, okay, so I read a couple of times, I read that comment a couple of times. Different people had made the comment, and I heard an audible voice in my ear that said, "Now's the time to tell our story, tell the whole story, hold nothing back. You are ready, and the world is ready." Now, this NDE happened 20 years ago, so YouTube wasn't full of NDE channels. I mean, not too many people knew what an NDE was. It was all music videos back then. So, okay, the world's ready to hear it, and I thought, all right, now's the time to tell it. So, I'm ready to tell the whole story, the whole weird second half.
Okay. Do you want to give any background, or how you want to do it? Whatever you want to do.
Sure, let's start at the beginning in case, well, and I'll kind of refresh people's memories
Yeah.
too. Um, I was at my son's wedding. It was about 5 hours from home, so we had packed up the whole family and went down there. We got there on a Wednesday, and after playing baseball in the park with a couple of my boys, I started feeling sick, and I thought I had the flu. Thursday, I got worse. Friday, we had the rehearsal dinner, and by then I was running a fever. It was pretty high. It was over 103. But I didn't want to be a distraction. I just powered through it. I thought after the wedding, I'll go to the hospital and get checked out. So I did. I made it through. Friday night, I didn't sleep at all. I was really just sweating. I was miserable. Tried taking Tylenol for some of the pain. It didn't work. So Saturday, we get through the wedding. The wedding was beautiful. After the wedding, I told my son, I go, I need to leave. I got to get checked out. So I went to the hospital, told him my symptoms. The nurse is poking around in my abdomen. She says, I think it's your appendix. I mean, everything points to your appendix, and they probably ruptured. So you'll be here for maybe 3 or 4 days if they have. If not, you'll go home in a day or two, which was perfect. This was at the end of the summer. My boys and my daughter were going back to school. Not the one that was married. He had graduated from college. But they were going back to school on a Tuesday, and here it is Saturday night. So I'm thinking, like, what are we going to do if I'm here for more than 1 or 2 days? And I was pretty sure it hadn't ruptured. Well, the surgeon walks in about an hour later, and he's talking to me, and he goes, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure they've ruptured. So let's just get you back in there and get you checked out." So they wheel me back to the surgical room. They slide me over onto the surgical table, which was freezing cold. And it's tiny. I had nowhere to put my hands, so I kind of fold my hands on top of my chest. And I'm looking around, and I look to my right, and Jesus, a physical person, Jesus, walks through the doors into the operating room, and he looks at me and he holds out his hand and he says, "I want to answer your prayer." And I'm going like, what is going on here? This is like, he was like a physical person. Like I expected the surgeon to walk in, but here he is, dark skin, bluish green eyes, more green than blue, wearing a white robe, and he holds out his hand and he says, "I want to answer your prayer." And I am so confused. I thought, well, I must have died. I'm thinking this in my mind. I must have died, but he's holding out my hand. I can't tell Jesus no. So I grab his hand. As soon as I touch his hand, we are both standing on what feels like a hill. There's beautiful green grass below my feet. My senses were heightened to the point where I could count every single blade of grass. I knew how many blades of grass there were. But everything else around me is white. I'm trying to look for something, and I can't see anything but the green grass. Still holding the hand of Jesus, and everything's white. And then I see there's like this round orb, basketball shape size, off a little bit to my right, and it's kind of shimmering, and it starts sending off these light beams. They're like fluorescent tubes, but they're like what you put in your kitchen or your shop, those kind of things. But they were about 2 feet long. They're a little bit bigger, and they're shiny on the ends, and they just start zipping by me. And one of them comes and hits me right in the forehead. And as it goes through me, it makes this like light buzzing sound. And it warmed me like right down to my toes. And I thought, man, this is just so weird. And I'm watching these things. And then all of a sudden, all the other white, now these things were like whiter than the white that I was seeing. It was really strange because it's the whitest thing I've ever seen. But they were almost like almost glowing, but they were kind of shimmering. So now all of a sudden, it's like somebody pulled a curtain of the white, and it goes from my right to my left, and it just opens up to this beautiful scene. There's flowers below the grass. They're pastel colors, and they're kind of moving in the wind, but there's no wind. And now that white that was like fog is now settled on this huge city that's in this valley below the hill that I'm standing on. So I can see all these rooftops poking through. And I see almost in the center, there's this big giant golden dome. It looked like a Capitol dome. And there's a couple more of those things around. There's a lot of they look like church steeples sticking through, and those things are white. They're bright white too. And I found this interesting. There were no crosses at the top of those, like what we have here. There's, a church steeple usually has a cross at the top. There are no crosses. And then across from this valley, this city that I'm looking at, the rooftops, there's another huge mountain on the other side of it. And this is probably, I'm guessing like a mile across the valley. And this mountain has these perfectly shaped trees. They look like pine trees, and the tips of them look like they had diamonds on the tips. And because they were kind of like sparkly. So one of the light beams now is going across the valley, and it hits the tip of that tree, and it bursts into hundreds of tiny white lights, like streaks of light, and it looked like fireworks, like they were just going off. And pretty soon more of those things hit the tips of the trees, and they're firing off all over the place. So there's this beautiful sunset above the trees that I'm looking at, but there's no sun. but the colors are just incredible. It's so vivid and so brilliant, these colors. And so you've got this contrast of all these beautiful colors, reds and oranges and blues, blues that you can't even describe as the color of the sky. And you have these white things popping all over the place. And I look back where those light tubes were coming from, those fluorescent light tubes. And when I looked at that, Jesus says to me, it's the glory of the Lord. And when he said that, I got so weak in my knees, I couldn't stand. I fell to my knees. And as soon as my knees hit the ground, they shocked me. They brought me back. So now all of that's gone. I'm looking at a surgeon or a doctor standing over me with a mask on his face. And he says, do you know your name? And I answered him in my mind, but I didn't verbalize. And I didn't even realize that I didn't say any words. And he asked me again, do you know your name? And then I realized what I did. So I opened my mouth to talk. My mouth is real hoarse and dry. And I said, Mike. And he says, do you know where you are? And I had to think for a minute. Like, I know I was in Ventura. That's the city in California where the wedding was. And then I thought, wait a minute, I was at my son's wedding. Yeah, I'm in Ventura. So I said Ventura, and he says, okay, good. He's back. And he says that to other people in the room. Now I realize there's like 4 or 5 other people, all nurses, and they're looking at me kind of concerned, but they start wheeling out of the room. And he says to one of them, let's get him up to ICU. So I spent 4 days in ICU and 12 days in the hospital and lost a bunch of weight. So
So
after,
is that what it was that it ruptured, the appendix?
yeah, it had ruptured. The next day, the surgeon came in to see me next morning, and he said, yours was the worst case I've ever seen. And I said, really? And he says, yeah. And he's poking around, looking at the stitches, and he starts to walk out, and he turns around and he says, I said it's the worst case. It's actually not true. Yours is the worst case I've ever seen where the patient lived. And this is a guy that's like 70 years old. He's seen a few cases.
Mhm.
Um, and he actually said to me, God's not done with you yet. And I thought, wow, I said, hey, thank you for saving my life. And he kind of pats my leg and he says, yeah, no problem. So he leaves. That night, I developed pneumonia and I was sleeping. I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning in ICU and I had the call nurse, the button for calling the nurse on my chest because I was so weak I couldn't lift my hands off my chest. So they had put it there and I fell asleep. Woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I could barely breathe. And I thought, man, I got a problem here. So I call the nurse. She comes in, she puts a stethoscope on my chest and she says, oh, honey, you're developing pneumonia. And I thought, oh man, if I get pneumonia, as sick as I am and as weak as I am, I thought I'm going to die. And I realized that, I had this NDE. Jesus took me to heaven and showed me. And I thought, well, that's why he showed me, because that's where I'm going. He wanted to put me at ease. And now I know that I'm not going to make it. Um, but they came in, the nurse called in other nurses. They packed me in ice. They gave me oxygen. She gave me a spirometer to start breathing into, which is this little tube you have to blow into it and push this little marble up. And she says, blow into this 10 times an hour. And I thought, man, I don't want to die. I mean, I have 3 other kids at home. Um, I need to get better. And so I thought, Jesus showed me heaven. It's a cool story, but I'm not going to die. I'm not going out like this. And it just made up my mind, like I'm going to try everything I can. So she said, breathe 10 times an hour. I think I did it probably 50 times an hour because I wanted to live. And as the other nurses were leaving, she sat down at my bed, at the end of the bed, and I felt something holy enter that room. And here it is 21 years later. It still gets me. Um, that's the best way I can describe it. Something holy entered that room. And I didn't know what it was until I heard the same voice, the voice of Jesus, say my name. He said, Michael. And I recognized the voice. I didn't see him this time, but I could tell that he came into the room and sat down. And he said, I had to get you flat on your back, away from all the distractions, so you could hear me. And I was just floored. I was like, wow, the first part 24 hours ago was weird enough. This has taken a whole turn. And I could just tell he sat down and he started talking to me. I ended up having a 3-hour conversation with Jesus. And I want to say face to face, but I couldn't see his face. But here's the weird part. When I was talking and when he was talking, the nurse couldn't hear any of that. And she stayed in the room the whole 3 hours. And I kept asking Jesus, are you really here? Is this real? Is this really happening? And every time he said yes. And the more I asked him, he almost like became not annoyed, but he was tickled by it because I kept asking him and I could hear him chuckle. And one
Typical
time
what?
I said, I could hear him chuckle.
You said
I- He
typical
said,
guy? Is that what you said?
I'm sorry?
You said typical guy? Is that what you said? I didn't hear the word. Typical.
No,
Oh,
no, no. He
sorry.
sat down and I kept saying, are you real? Is this really happening? And he said yes. And then he became, he would chuckle after I asked him that a few times. And he said, yes, it's really happening. And he says, I'm going to ask more of you. He says, dang it, sorry. It just still chokes me up. He says, our story is going to be heard by millions. And I said, Lord, I'm not a guy that's comfortable talking to millions of people. Now back then, like I've said, there was no YouTube. I said, that's Billy Graham's thing. I'm not Billy Graham, Because back then, if you wanted to talk to millions of people, I
Right,
don't think it'd be possible at one time, but you'd have to gather, 100,000 people in a stadium and take the stage and talk to them. I wasn't going to do that.
right.
I wasn't comfortable talking to three people at one time, let alone, thousands. I didn't want to get up in front of a church. I'm not pastor material, you know? And so I kept saying, I can't do that. And he says, well, you will. And he told me some things about my life. It wasn't during this 3-hour conversation, he didn't say, anything super prophetic, like the world's going to end in so many days, you got to get the word out or whatever. It was more personal messages for me. He told me that I would have valleys to walk through. Um, that, but it was okay that he approved it and that he would be with me. And he also said, when you step out in faith, he says, I just want to give you this warning. When you step out in faith, the enemy steps up his attack. And every time I recovered, and every time I walked through a valley, I would think, this is what he was talking about, like my father passed away unexpectedly and it was just terrible. And I thought, oh, he said he'd be with me. And I could just feel his presence with me going through those valleys. I had crazy stuff happen. Um, it, our church was trying to build a new place, and we had all these complications. Where things would happen to the building committee members. One of them would get sick, one of them would leave, one of them would go through a divorce, one of them had cancer. I mean, just all these things. It just these spiritual attacks, and I even my marriage ended 2 years after my NDE, which I think is
Typical.
pretty common for people that go through NDEs. Um, but at the very end, after our 3-hour conversation, he kind of said, "Let's stay in touch." And ever since that NDE, I have been able to hear his voice like all the time, and I learned to keep him involved in just the minutia of my life. And I think that's one of the messages that he wants me to pass along is that Jesus wants to be involved in everything. I'm going through this big renovation now in my house. We bought a new house in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it's a mess. I mean, everything needs to be fixed. The plumbing underneath it's just a mess. So I go to work in my own house and I'm trying to fix all this stuff and I get frustrated because it's a mess. When you go through renovation, it's a disaster.
Mhm.
So there was one day where I was asking God to help me find a screwdriver of all things. Simple thing, because I couldn't find it. I was like, Jesus, I need help finding this screwdriver. I'm so frustrated. And I hear him say in an audible voice, it's like somebody was standing in the room with me. It's in your truck. And I was so frustrated. I said, it's not in my truck. I know where I keep my screwdrivers. It's not in my truck. And I hear him laugh, chuckle, that same chuckle. And so I thought, man, I'm just so frustrated. I need to sit down. And I went in the kitchen. The kitchen's a disaster, but I make a sandwich and I sit there and I start eating a sandwich. And all of a sudden, instead of seeing these things around me, I'm watching a movie start playing. It's in my head, but it's me working the next day. And I'm holding the screwdriver that I'm looking for. And I put it in my pocket and in my jeans pocket. And then the movie fast forwards. I walk out to my truck. I sit down in my truck, and the screwdriver poked me. And so I took it out and I put it in my center console. And so I thought, oh my gosh, he just showed me where, like I should have listened. It is in my truck. I go out to my truck and I look at the center console. There's the screwdriver. And I was just like, oh, I'm sorry. You know, I should have listened. I should have obeyed. I should have, gone out there and looked. But, being the stupid human being that I am, I
That's
think,
how I know when the voice is not of me, is when I start to argue with it.
yeah, yeah, it's something that you don't want to do or you're not comfortable doing or whatever. But yeah,
Something you wouldn't have thought of. Something, yeah, that it's like, no way. Like, wait a minute, I've learned. So if
yeah,
I'm starting to
exactly.
argue with it, you need to
Yeah,
listen.
yeah. Yeah, so that's the crazy second half and a 3 hour conversation with Jesus. And everything that he told me has come true. I mean, millions of people have heard my story. They've heard my story all around the world. And one of the things that happened after that NDE, I wasn't comfortable talking to a crowd. He kept putting me in situations where I had to talk to more and more people, and the crowds grew. Now, it wasn't about Jesus, but I got comfortable speaking to people in crowds. I coached baseball, and so I would talk to the parents, and then I became president of a couple of athletic associations where we would have these big fundraising dinners, and I would talk to more and more people. And at one point, I'm talking to like 500 people at a time, and I thought, wow, I feel okay doing this. It's all right. It's not so bad. So he got me ready.
When did you realize this was a near-death experience, or did you know right away because you'd heard of it, or how did that go?
I was familiar with them, to be honest with you, most of the time. Like the next day, I knew, when they're wheeling me back up to ICU, I thought, oh my gosh, I just had a near-death experience. I had heard of them,
That's cool
but
that you knew.
honestly, I knew, but the few that I had heard, I thought that just sounds too weird. It can't be true.
Mhm.
It's just, I don't know. Somebody's looking for their 3 minutes of fame or whatever. I just never believed in them. But
Mhm.
then, like I learned of the little Todd Burpo kid, and I thought, well, how does he make stuff up? Like he said, Grandpa has wings. Well, we don't become angels, but maybe God did that to give him some comfort. And he knew about the little sister that he never had that she lost during her pregnancy. And I thought, he can't make that up. So something happened to that little guy, but I just didn't know. I was confused. And this whole thing for me started like 40 years ago when I was probably 5 years old. I'm not 45 now, but I was when the NDE happened. When I was a kid, I asked God to show me heaven because I was at my grandfather's funeral and the priest is up there on the altar saying, what a great place heaven is. Pete's in heaven now. There's no more pain, there's no tears. And I remember talking to God saying, heaven sounds like a really cool place. Could you show me heaven? And it became this nightly prayer of me as a little kid asking God to show me heaven, and He did.
It's that funny how things work. I
Yeah.
was just a few years ago, I was starting to fall asleep, and I don't know what made me start thinking it, but I was like, God, I'd like to see what you look like, God, because when I had my NDE, I saw Jesus, but I didn't see God. It was just that outline and the bright light. And so I was just like, I believed in you and talked to you my whole life. I just like to see, not thinking I'd see anything. I see what you look like. And I just started off to drift off to sleep. And my husband come and he says, "Oh, you got to come outside. You got to see this." And I thought, what in the world do I need to see at night? I thought we were going to sleep. So I got up and he opened up the door to the front porch. And there on a pine tree, it's right next to our front porch, this great big pine tree, is this beautiful white owl. And
Hmm.
the first thing I thought was, I was just saying, God, show yourself to me. And I've lived here 40 years. And, we've had a couple owls way back in the woods. We could kind of see, at a distance. But this was right at our front door. And
Wow.
it stayed there for the longest time. And,
Wow.
just sometimes when you ask and you don't think that you'll receive, you can be really surprised.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. I mean, I after my NDE, I had a whole new appreciation for creation and how it all works, and it's just so perfect. Even in a sinful, fallen world, this creation is just really, it's just perfect. It's beautiful, and it's gonna get even better. So we have a lot to look forward to.
A lot of people aren't thinking that way right now, are they?
Yeah, that's true. Been a rough couple of weeks in this country, in the world, really. And as a believer in Jesus, I know it's going to get worse. I can't imagine, but
Mm.
we know that it's going to get worse, and just hold on to him during these times.
Yeah, I just love the revival right now. All the people getting saved because of what happened with Charlie Kirk,
Yeah,
and people singing by masses all over the world in hymns, and it's like I bet they could have never expected this. The person that did this, whatever he thought would come of it, was probably just a immediate gratification for himself. Nobody could ever predict the scenario, but God does. He
yeah,
knew. He
yeah.
knew what this would do.
His word says all things work for the good for those who love the Lord, and we know Charlie loved the Lord, and so now all the people that love the Lord are getting to witness. I think God's peeling that back a little bit and saying, I do have a grand plan. So trust me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did you get a lot of pushback from Christian friends?
I
Like,
did.
like
Yeah.
it's not biblical. It's like it's not from the Bible, like what you're saying.
Yeah. I heard that a lot. I actually, well, in my book, I go through, there's a whole chapter kind of where I just say a word to the naysayers. And the last ones that I address are Christians, because you'll hear that a lot, but a lot of times that I've found what Christians tend to do is take something out of the Bible and it's out of context. I have so many people say Jesus doesn't have brown wavy hair or greenish blue eyes. His hair is woolly white. And I'm like, God, you're
Really? Never heard
talking about a
that.
metaphor from Revelation. I've been told that one so many times.
Huh.
Um, and they'll say NDEs aren't biblical. Well, you know, Jesus answered my prayer. So does Jesus answers prayers? Because you can't have it both ways. As a kid, I used to pray that all the time. Show me heaven. And Jesus said, "Okay, I'm going to answer your prayer. I'm showing you heaven." So, I mean, there's all kinds of. Paul had an NDE, I think, just didn't know how to describe it. They didn't have the medical advances that we have now, and that's another reason why people are coming back is because we have the ability to resuscitate and bring them back. So I don't know. You get half the people will say that's beautiful, that's an amazing thing, and then the other half of Christians just say, I just don't believe it. And I just wish they wouldn't put God in a box like that.
Yeah, it's like we get on both ends, the Christian, the religious. No, that's not biblical. Like you're a false prophet, you're crazy, you're lying, you're wanting attention or something. And then on the other end, you have the atheists or the New Age that don't want to hear a Christian NDE, or they want to believe everything is like we are all one and reincarnation, and they want to fit their narrative. Or like I say, the atheist just like no way, Jesus isn't real. And so there's like both ends of the spectrum. It's like, where do we fit? We don't. We
Yeah.
just speak
Yeah.
our truth and it's out there, and they'll find out when they have theirs.
Yeah, that's all you can do. And I, that's something else that God worked on was my heart because 20 years ago, I heard that a few times and I just felt like saying, screw you. Back then that was my reaction. Now I'm just like, God's worked on my heart, and it's taken a long time for me to say, I'm sorry, but I don't agree. And then I pray for those people, that they'll have some kind of awakening. I don't wish a near-death experience on anybody
Right.
because it is near death, and mine was really close. But I just ask God to reveal Himself to those people and just get them on board, before it's too late. Give them a chance.
Somebody very close to me took me off to the side recently and kind of like, I think he was doing an intervention. Like, I didn't know he felt this way. He's like, you need to read your Bible. These new NDEs are chemicals in the brain. Uh, it's not real. Read your Bible, and read your Bible. I kept saying over there, you need to go to church. You need to go to church. You need to read your Bible. And it felt like a spiritual attack.
Mm. Yeah.
And I was totally brokenhearted, and it still hurts me that they look at me like that.
Hmm.
And like, how much more Christian could I be? What could I possibly gain by reading the Bible more or going to
Yeah.
church more? What do I need to change? Like I'm a sinner. Like if I want to go to heaven, I'll stop this NDE stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
like, it felt like a sword right through my heart. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
It hurts.
you know, I thought, they can burn me at the stake. Do what you got to do, people, because I'll never deny my near-death experiences.
No, no. I mean, and all I can do is share it. And like I said, pray for those people. Jesus said, you'll know a tree by its fruit. And I'm doing the work for the kingdom. I'm doing what Jesus told me to do. Tell my story. And hopefully people, I'm not going to try and save anyone.
Right.
I always say I'm just a mustard seed in this grand scheme of things. But I point people to Jesus and the kingdom, and just look into it. Be like Lee Strobel, the guy that was an atheist, and he honestly he was a columnist for the Chicago Tribune, and he started looking into it, and he said, I'm going to prove my wife wrong. There's no God, there's no Jesus. And he's a very firm believer now, and he did his homework, and I've done enough. I mean, my NDE is really all I needed, but I can just feel Jesus walking with me every day. I hear him speak to me. I've probably heard him 20 times audibly, and when he speaks, the things that he tells me are going to happen, they happen. And then I have proof, and I think that doesn't just you can't just make that stuff up.
Right.
It's real. We can't see it, and we were not created with a mind that can comprehend eternity, and we can't comprehend God. We can't comprehend any of that stuff. Most of the spiritual stuff, we don't see it, so we just figure that's not real. But it's real.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
spiritual warfare, and yeah, it's all
After,
real.
yeah, he shows us. I mean, we get confirmations that help us
Sure.
know that it's real. The night before my husband had a colonoscopy over a year ago, I was, doing my normal prayer at night, and um, my husband was downstairs watching TV, and I was thinking about his colonoscopy and I was worried because he had some signs, that might not be good. I about ready to fall asleep and all of a sudden, like you get the audible voice and it said, it's going to be a very difficult journey. And I got right up and I went downstairs and I said, turn off TV. I said, we're going to get bad news tomorrow with your colonoscopy. I said, God just told me it's going to be a very difficult journey. And I said, I don't know how it's going to end up. He didn't tell me that. I said, but I'm telling you right now, you've got cancer. And next day, yeah, after colonoscopy, you have cancer. And so, it's been a
Wow.
it's been over a year. And he rang the bell, cancer free, but in my heart, something was saying, not yet. Like they haven't found something yet. And then a couple months later, he had a bowel obstruction, and they said one more day he had been dead. And I thought I just knew it wasn't this wasn't over. And then so they found a couple more cancers, and he's going back through chemo now, and they're both incurable. They're small intestine and the peritoneal, it's called, the lining of his abdomen. But I was praying one day, and I heard God's voice say, "Nothing's going to happen to Jim." And
Wow.
I've ever since then, I have been like, nothing's going to be good. I just like had this hope that I had not been able to find in over a year. I mean, I have put on weight. I've laid in bed. I don't want to get out of bed. I'm so depressed. I don't want to lose my husband. I don't want to live without my husband. And he's like, he don't hear any negativity. He's going to be okay. He's so optimistic, and he would get mad at me. He didn't want to hear my sadness, my fears. But then when I heard nothing's going to happen to Jim, I've had, ever since I've had this faith. And the next day, because I had this faith, when I happened to see this thing pop up about a study on dandelion root. And so I did my research, and I found on medical reports, they've known for 10 years that dandelion root kills colon cancer by 95% in 48 hours in
Wow.
the Petri dishes, but they've not done human trials. So we got him on that. And I couldn't, and we went and got a CEA, and they do regularly. And I knew it was going to be good. And his CEAs went from 14 to 2. And then he had 2 weeks later, he had a CT coming up, and I knew it was going to be good. I didn't have this fear and this worry and all this scare before. I knew, even though they're telling us incurable, incurable, you know.
Hmm.
And some people don't even want to do chemo. Some people choose to do nothing. I'm like, no hope. But we knew, and because he's come to believe in what I hear, and they did a CT scan, and if it was either undetectable or shrunk. I'm like,
Wow, that's
people,
amazing.
get close to Jesus, learn to hear his voice, get your relationship, because as you know, it's real. These NDEs are real. We hear God's voice in heaven and we bring that back. I feel like whatever we experience in heaven, it comes back with us like another sense, like a seventh
Hmm.
sense, the eighth sense. And we just have to learn to trust it. That's all our job is, to learn to trust.
Yep, absolutely. Well, praise God for Jim's good report. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
We're
amazing
optimistic.
stuff.
Yep.
Well, cool. That's great.
Yep. So
Yeah,
that's why I haven't been doing many shows in the last year. Is like, who wants to talk about death? I was so riddled with fear. I don't
right.
want to talk about dying. It's not funny. It's not nice anymore. Oh, you're into E. Tell me, I don't want to keep death away from me.
Yeah.
So, but it was nice seeing you again. Was there anything else? Oh, your book. Tell us about your book. You had another one. Is this your second one?
Yeah, this is my second one. This was when I heard Jesus say, "Now's the time to tell the whole story." I thought, I need to write a book. I mean, you can share a lot on a podcast, but there are so many, details that quite frankly I forget. So I had to write it down because I spend a lot of time with, before I write, I always pray, God, just bring back some memories, and help me write this. And there have been times when I'll read something that I wrote and I'll think, wow, that's really good. I must not have written that. That must have been the Holy
I
Spirit telling
know.
me.
I know. When
Right.
my husband would read my book and he'd look at me, he's like, who are you? And one of you knows my wife.
Yeah,
Like, I don't know.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, the book just came out. I don't know. I think it was just a couple weeks ago. I think it's available on Amazon. It's called "I Held the Hand of Jesus in Heaven," and hopefully, it brings some joy and hope to a lot of people.
Okay. I will put a link to your book. Do you want both books in there or just your most recent?
I think just the most recent.
Okay.
Yeah, the other one's
And
just so old now. It's not even in the discount rack anymore.
and I'll put a link to your website in there as well. Is there a place people know how to contact you on your website?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. They can follow me on all the social and yeah. I really enjoy interacting with people. I try to answer the comments or like them or, just let people know that, hey, I appreciate you taking time to comment on it. And even the nasty ones, I'll
Yeah.
say, sorry you feel that way, but I've found that with NDEs, there's a lot of interpretation that has to happen. Mine was pretty cut and dried. I mean, it was Jesus walked into the operating room and answered my prayer. That's pretty easy to interpret. But I think some of them, maybe God just does that to just bring some comfort. Maybe they know that they're not ready to accept Jesus as their savior at that point. I don't know. I just don't know how it all works. I just trust that God has a greater plan for everybody.
Yeah.
And
I know. So I say I have questions. I don't have a lot of answers. I
yeah,
have a lot of
exactly.
questions.
Sure, so do I. Yeah.
And I love it that the older we get, it seems like the wiser we get because we have processed this. It seems like it takes a gift and it takes a while to unwrap it and unwrap it. And, just like you wasn't ready to talk about this one part. And I had parts too that I was kind of holding back. Just wasn't ready. And I wasn't ready to process it. And
Yeah.
when I started telling my NDE to my husband, it's like the words coming out of my mouth sounds so crazy. When you're standing there telling somebody, I saw Jesus and God, and Jesus took me back down to earth, and I saw my boys in the future, like cuckoo
Yeah.
town, like I don't want to look like a cuckoo. But then I finally got to a point one day, I had this little imagination. I picture going to heaven the next time and God saying to me, did you tell anyone about
Mm.
being in heaven? Because, he sent me back so I could raise my sons. I was told it was my time. And then I ultimately was sent back to raise my sons. Like, the gratitude I have, but like, I would hang my head. I saw myself hanging in shame. Like, no, I was afraid people call me crazy or liar. And the shame I felt in
Yeah.
this imagination, that I thought, that ain't gonna happen. Like, they can call me whatever. I don't care. I will take the bullets because God gave me my life back. Like you got your life back. Like he said, they haven't had seen anybody with it this bad that was still alive. And that's the way it was with me too. I had the biggest tubal pregnancy the hospital ever saw. And you could go with your life, shrug it off. All that just sounds like nonsense and not own it, not share it. The other day, a Monday, the Daily Mail, what's it called? They did a story, and so it was published Monday. And the headline was that I said God was so cruel. I never said that.
Oh,
And I
wow.
and I had kept bugging her, take it down, take it down. It's like 3 days. And so I'm getting all this hate. Oh, she's crazy. She's this and that. And I had to answer each one. There's like 500 comments, and I'm
Yeah.
answering probably 100 of them saying, I didn't say that. I'm trying to get them to change it. Hopefully they do it soon. I didn't say that. And there's a couple other things they misquoted me saying. And I was just like, there's these blasphemy about God saying that I said it. And so even after it's taken down, like people's opinions was still like, well, she's fat. Well, she's ugly. Well, she's crazy. Well, what kind of drugs is she on? She been taking mushrooms. It didn't change.
Yeah.
Because then goes my real story. All that this bad stuff they put in wasn't true was out. And so it's my real story. And they're still just as bad. It's times we live in. But
Yeah.
this is, so this is putting out for people all over the world. And is in this the Daily Mail's, centered in UK, but it goes everywhere. But
Right.
and we think we want to like praise God, tell billions of people, like you were told, like, to share. Now, do you go on actual stages now and tell your story? I know
Sure.
you have other things. Okay.
Yeah.
Where have you been? I'm curious.
Just churches,
Okay.
basically just churches. Yeah. Yeah. And it's nice because, you can look out in an audience and know um, if people are with you or if they're just going to roll their eyes and go, this guy's a maniac. I mean, gosh, I've been called the devil, because of what I believe happened to me. And it's like I can't change it. Look at my fruit. I'm pointing people towards the kingdom, and the devil would never do that. So,
Right. Yeah, that's why I said when there was two was saying like I was the devil or I must have went to hell. It's like,
yeah.
and see Jesus and God? Like really? So I don't know. But yeah. So is there anything else you want to leave us with?
I think we're good. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll try to get this out today and I'll send you the link to the video as soon as it's published.
Sounds great. Thanks, Peggy. I appreciate
Okay.
you having me back.
Uh-huh. Best of
Thank
luck to
you.
you.
All right. You too. And say hi to Jim.
Okay.
Praying for him.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Uh-huh.